All right, today we have former Senate candidate in South Carolina and surrogate for Jon Ossoff and Rafael Warnock in Georgia. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing in Georgia.
Yeah, shortly after my election, I decided to dust myself off and get back on the bike and launched a new pack called the Dirt Road Pack, which is focused on going to communities and areas and states like Georgia, and Georgia's very similar to South Carolina, that have been neglected for the past decade or so and really need some investment. And so our first initiative was to help out my two friends, Rafael Warnock and Jon Ossoff. We have raised almost $1 million to benefit their campaigns. And we're working with some of the small grassroots groups as well. And so we're doing everything that we possibly can. I have some personal affinity for Georgia because that's where my mom lives. My sister's there. My niece and nephew are there. Many aunts and uncles are also in Georgia. And so they're our next door neighbor to the west. And I'm going to try to do everything I possibly can to make sure that Jon and Rafael are successful, because it helps not only Georgia, but it helps America.
So as of this recording, we are in the middle of these negotiations for the Senate to pass any semblance of adequate relief. It basically took 10 months and all we got was $600, and we're still pushing for $2,000 right now. So based on your experience in Georgia, is this having any impact on the race?
Oh, it is. Listen, you have Perdue, who was vehemently opposed to any checks. And now all of a sudden he and Kelly Loeffler are now saying they support $2,000 relief. And that type of sea change means one or two things. And the thing that it means to me is they are feeling the heat right now in Georgia from Democrats, Republicans, and independents who are struggling right now dealing with the COVID. And they need that relief, particularly in this holiday season. And so it's about time that Loeffler and Perdue actually start to do something that benefits their constituents instead of their own stock portfolios.
Right. And I think what's especially ironic, too, is that they only came out in support of these $2,000 checks once it was assured, basically, that McConnell wouldn't even allow the bill to come onto the Senate for a vote.
Right. That's exactly right. Because, listen, I worked on Capitol Hill. I worked in the highest rungs of leadership in the House. I ran the whip operation for House Democrats. I know what happens, in terms of the negotiations. One of the top priorities for leaders in both the House and the Senate are their vulnerable members. And right now, there are no two members more vulnerable in the United States Senate than Perdue and Loeffler. And so that means Mitch McConnell will move heaven and earth, and he's already moving millions of dollars right now into Georgia in order to benefit them. So if they went to Mitch McConnell and said to him, we really need this done, he would do it. Right. But they aren't genuinely going to him because they don't care. All they want is to remain in power.
Right. I don't know how much of a clearer indication you can get than this. This is Mitch McConnell proving that so long as he's majority leader, Americans won't see relief. And at a time when that relief is so desperately needed, he's basically doing Democrats' job for them.
Oh, that's exactly right. I can tell everybody, and particularly folks in Georgia, because those are the most important people in this country right now. All you voters in Georgia, you're the most important. Listen, Mitch McConnell will stand in, his mama could draft the bill that he did not like, and he would not let it pass. And it just shows that this guy does not care about anybody other than the special interests that butter his bread. And we need someone who cares about the American people, particularly those folks right now who are struggling across this country, and particularly in the state of Georgia. And as long as he is the majority leader, he will be the grim reaper of legislation, good legislation that helps people in the United States Senate. And we don't need that. We need someone who will work with Biden in order to get things done for all of our people. And Mitch McConnell just doesn't fit that bill.
So aside from relief, what issues in particular seem to be resonating with voters in Georgia?
Well, I think the three issues that Jon Ossoff has been running on and had a tour across Georgia: healthcare, jobs, and justice. Those are huge issues for people, particularly folks who will support Jon and Rafael in this election. We know the devastating impact of the coronavirus on our health, but even before the coronavirus came to our shores, people were struggling in terms of healthcare. Georgia is one of those states similar to South Carolina that did not expand Medicaid. And as a result, many of their rural hospitals have closed over the past few years, which has a devastating impact on not only Democrats, but Republicans and African Americans and white voters and Hispanic voters, on all of these voters living in those communities. We need someone who can go to the United States Senate and work on improving healthcare. John and Rafael will do that. Jobs. We see right now that the unemployment is still lingering, and particularly in communities of color. And they are the folks that are unemployed right now. They're on the verge of being evicted from their homes. And so we need senators who understand the impact that this virus has had and is going to do everything they possibly can to bring jobs back to these communities. And of course, justice. Georgia has been in center of seeing how injustice can impact communities, in particular communities of color. We need to have a Civil Rights Act, a Voting Rights Act. We need to make sure that we're protecting the right to vote, but also protecting the lives of folks as well. And I know that John and Rafael will work on those things so vehemently when they're in the United States Senate.
I'm a data nerd, so I want to talk about some numbers now. Can you speak about the fact that, so many new voters were registered from the general to the runoff? I believe we have 76,000 new voters between the general and the runoff between November and now.
And what I'm told, they're overwhelmingly young, with 56% of them under the age of 35. And most of it, I think disproportionate, these are people of color. Right. And so, that bodes well for Jon Ossoff and Rafael Warnock. And the turnout right now that we're seeing in Georgia is just unbelievable. They have broken the record for the most votes in a runoff election. I think it was like 2.1 or 2.2 million. They've gotten over 2.5 million votes thus far, and early vote is still happening. So those numbers are only going to get larger, and that's just a good sign for Jon Ossoff and Rafael Warnock. But my warning to all of them, I beat Lindsey Graham with the early vote here in South Carolina. I went into Election Day with 150,000 vote lead over Lindsey. You can't just rest your laurels on early vote. You also got to make sure that you turn the vote out on Election Day, and that's as equally as important as getting these votes up on the board as early as you possibly can.
Well, at least for these early numbers, I mean, what would you attribute these changes to? Like, how are we able to mobilize another nearly 100,000 voters that weren't mobilized even in November?
Yeah, and partly in the early vote, I think they're saying that the African Americans in particular, people of color more globally, are turning out at a higher level than they did at the presidential level just in past November. I think part of what you're also seeing here is they didn't do a lot of canvassing in Georgia on the Democratic side going into the November election. It was the same thing here. We didn't start canvassing until October in South Carolina. That really makes a difference. That's such an important component of how Democrats turn out the vote, is having people be able to communicate on a personal level with voters. And they are doing some COVID-safe canvassing right now, and I think that is really helping to make a big difference.
On the messaging front now, are there lessons that we're learning in Georgia that, by virtue of getting a second chance to win this election, have been different? Like, what's the best way to reach voters that we maybe failed to reach in November?
Well, the canvassing part, I go back to that. I think that is really making a key difference. You're also seeing an investment, and we're doing this also, investing in some of these small grassroots organizations and groups in many of these rural areas. That's just as important. We want to make sure that we turn out the vote in Atlanta, because that's the heart of the Democratic vote. But you got a lot of Democratic vote in these rural counties, and that is also very, very important. And so making sure that you're and luckily John and Rafael and the Georgia Democratic Party, along with the efforts that we see from Stacey Abrams and Fair Fight and Black Matters Vote, Black Voters Matter Fund. All of these groups are also concentrating their effort on making sure they're on Black radio, making sure that they are getting their message out to gospel stations so that they can get into these areas and communities where it may be much more difficult to canvass, but they are listening to radio. The digital outreach is also important. And so having those resources is just crucial to making sure that that outreach takes place.
Out of the George Floyd protests came the defund the police movement. And on one hand, that movement was effective enough to lead to a massive spike in registrations for young people and people of color. At the same time, it's been condemned by people representing more white, moderate districts. So with media getting nationalized now and the ability to shape our messaging on a local level kind of disappearing, how did Democrats cater to both working class whites in the Rust Belt and young Black activists in places like Georgia and South Carolina, knowing that certain messaging that works in one place might actually be counterproductive in another?
Well, that's part of the needle you thread when you have a coalition like we have in the Democratic Party, which is the diversity. I believe that diversity is our greatest strength. But diversity comes with some complications and complexities. Because even on the issue of the defund the police, I can tell you older African Americans are not very sympathetic to that type of message. And so
Yeah.
One of the lessons that I've learned in politics is this: when you are explaining, you're losing. And what is very, very important for us to do as a party is to make sure that the messages that we have and that we promote and that we put out there are clear, that they're concise, and that they go directly to the issues that people are dealing with. John Ossoff and Rafael Warnock want to make sure we tackle this issue of injustice. They want to make sure that people feel safe walking down their streets, interacting with the officers that are committed to protecting and serving their communities. And they're going to work on legislation to make that happen. And they've been clear and they've been concise with that. And I think we have to continue that effort to make sure that folks, regardless if you're in a majority white suburb or if you are in a majority Black community in Atlanta, that you understand what we as a party stand for, what we're fighting for, that we see you, that we hear you, and that when we go to Washington, D.C., we're going to work on your behalf. The one thing that you know that is true is Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue are not working for you. They're working for their stockbroker and making sure that their portfolio is sound. So go with the people who have proven records that they're going to work for the least of these in our society, but they're going to work for all of us. And that's what we get with Rafael Warnock and John Ossoff.
On a personal note, Jaime, what's next for you?
Who knows, man? I am, my name has been mentioned for as a possibility for the next DNC chair. And if I get the call from the president-elect asking me to do that, I'd be happy to serve in that capacity. But if not, I'm going to continue my effort to rebuilding the Democratic Party across this country in every state, regardless if it's red, purple, or blue. I believe that we need to make sure that we have good candidates that are out there that are running and that folks understand that we haven't forgotten them, that we're going to fight for them, and that we're invested in their well-being, and that they and their kids and their family members can live the American dream.
Yeah, and I think, the initial reaction with someone like Stacey Abrams was to kind of scoff at the idea that she was going to, pull back the reins and kind of work to do exactly what you were saying in the state of Georgia. And now look how important that's become. So
that's exactly
I think
right.
that, we definitely can't overlook that. So one last question for you. What's the message for those still on the fence or those still deciding whether to vote at all in Georgia?
Well, I think those folks should really take a look at their senators, because in essence, this is a referendum on them and the job that they have done. And the question that they have to ask is this: do you honestly believe that Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue are fighting for you? Do you honestly believe that they are working on behalf of your family? Do you honestly believe that they're trying to build a bridge to the future to make sure that your kids have all the resources that they need in order to do well? You have in Georgia right now communities where there is no broadband. You have in Georgia right now communities that have no hospitals. You have in Georgia right now people who are standing or sitting in their cars for soup lines and all. And the question is, what is Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue doing in order to address that? And the only reason why they are talking about these issues right now, if they talk about them at all, is because they are being pressured to do so by the folks who do care about these issues. And that's John Ossoff and Rafael Warnock. So just think about, in our time that we need help the most, we need to make sure that we have senators that are fighting for us, that are in our corner, that are working for us, that we don't have to tell them that we need their help because they are so integrated into our neighborhoods and our communities that they know that we need help. That's the difference that you get with Rafael Warnock and John Ossoff.
Well said. All right, Jaime, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.